So good evening. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome everyone this evening to enjoy the insight and humanity of Rabbi David Stav. Rav Stav is the chief rabbi of the city of Shoham, the chairman of the Tzohar organization, and serves as a rabbi for the Ezra Youth Movement. Rav Stav is a graduate of Yeshivat Merkaz Harav and a Talmid of the late Rabbi Avram Shapira. He has Dayanut, served in the IDF Armored Corps, and has held several senior yeshiva and educational positions. Rav Stav is most widely known at the moment for his work with Tzohar, which he founded in 2009. And while Tzohar exists to pave the way for a more ethical and joyful approach to Jewish life in Israel and bring Israelis closer to their Jewish heritage, it has nonetheless had a significant international reach as a source for halachic solutions to ethical problems and psak halacha with seichel. As a charity, Tzohar strives to be non-political. However, in challenging the establishment, Rav Stav and his team have certainly found themselves at the heart of significant controversies. One of the most significant themes of the 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz, which begins this evening, and Tisha B'Av, in 3 weeks' time, is the damage done to Israel through sinat chinam, an unnecessary schism and hatred between Jews. In many respects, Tzohar builds across the perceptual chasm between religious authority and the large number of non-affiliated or alienated Jewish members of Israeli society. It aspires to provide an understanding, accessible, contemporary, friendly, no-strings, can-do approach. Rav Stav sees Tzohar as a dominant and promising social, the Jewish place of choice for a generation who spurn coercion and crave respect, relevance and variety when it comes to their Jewish experience. Former British Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks says, so many Jews feel the religious world is looking down on them. Tzohar says, be part of this heritage. It is yours as much as it's ours. I was privileged to meet Rav Stav when I was still in Sydney and to have him as one of the first scholars in residence that I hosted here in Kinloss. He's assisted in weddings in Israel for members of both communities, for which I am most grateful. As with our previous conversations, I've put everyone on mute at the moment. Please feel free to write comments in the chat box or to raise your hand if you have any particular questions, and you'll find the Raise My Hand key in the 3 dots of the Participants tab. I'm delighted to welcome Rav Stav via Zoom to Kinloss this evening. Good evening, Rav Stav.
Good evening to everyone, and I really admire your arrogance that at that time at night, 8:30, leave their issues and deal and are dedicating the time for this discussion.
Well, all the more we thank you because it's 10:30 where you are. So
okay,
it's right into Shabbat.
The beginning of the night.
It's the beginning of the night. When I'm gonna. When you were growing up, did you imagine yourself as destined to have a career? Hang on, I've muted everybody, which will have muted you. No, you're unmuted. When you were growing up, did you imagine yourself as destined to have a career in rabbinic leadership? And I have okay, yeah.
Now I'm muted.
Now you're unmuted.
Okay. Okay. I received the decision. I took the decision to become a rabbi in my 2nd year in yeshiva. Originally, me and my parents wanted me to be a lawyer. And actually, that's where I directed myself. But I remember the day when one of my chavrutot, the guy that I used to learn with, in the yeshiva says to me, you know, people could change history or learn about history. To which kind of people do you want to belong to? Do you want to change or do you want to learn about others' changes? So I said, I think I want to change. So he said, if that's the case, so then you have to be a rabbi. Because here is where the changes are done. So if you want to influence people, And if you want to make an impact, be with us. So that's where I took the decision to be a rabbi.
So in a decision to change the world, you must have had people who influenced you and were inspired you in your hashkafa. It could be from history or people who were your teachers. Who particularly influenced Rav Stav?
I think that the most important figure was my mother. My mother was a daughter of a very famous Rebbe in Yerushalayim. Next time when you come to visit Yerushalayim, hopefully soon, when the corona will be over, next door to the Supreme Court, between the Supreme Court and the Knesset, there is a small cemetery with a grave that thousands of people come to daven there, to pray there. And that's the grave of my grandpa. And my mother, as his daughter, used to tell me always, you ought to be a mensch before you'll be a scholar, before you'll be a rabbi.
Derech Eretz Kadma LeTorah.
Derech Eretz Kadma LeTorah. Or as we say in the sacrifices, Leolam Yeheh Adam, Yireh Shamayim Baseter Uvagalui. So you have to be Adam, you have to be a human being before you are fearing God. And I think that's the first lesson, and I think she influenced me the most. In the way of learning, of analyzing, it's my father. My father was a big scholar, but he was a librarian. He didn't do his career as a rabbi. He learned in Lublin before World War II, in the very famous yeshiva there of Meir Shapira. And he always educated me to not to give up and not to say, well, that's the way the Gemara answers. If you don't feel comfortable, keep on asking. If Rashi is not good for you, ask him. Don't hesitate to criticize. You have to feel free and you have to feel frank when you analyze Gemara. And these are the figures that influenced me the most.
Right. And what prompted you to set up Tzohar?
The murder of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. I mean, for us now, we look at it already 25 years later. It seems to be a history. But at that time, we are now commemorating tonight and tomorrow Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. If we want to understand what is Tisha B'Av and what is Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, is just to look at Israel in 25 years ago to see how the division, the split between right and left. To see today the hatred between ultra-Orthodox and secular people, and to see the gaps that were created between people. I don't want to speak Lashon Hara on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, but just to give you the feeling, a sense of the feeling. Yesterday I read an article that describes how a taxi driver, Israeli taxi driver, takes a woman, a Haredi woman in Ashdod, and then he starts to curse her. And he says, well, you, the Haredim, you are responsible for the corona. You brought the corona, and he threw her out from the taxi while he was driving. And then he threw afterwards her bags. Now, I'm not saying that a dispute is not legitimate. I know what dispute is about. Our tradition of Torah is full with debates between rabbis. But such a hatred that led to the murder of Yitzhak Rabin and could lead easily to other murders, this was the motivation to establish Tzohar as an organization that will try to bridge the gaps between observant people and secular people.
So which are the particular gaps that you saw that Tzohar leapt into the gulf for?
So we started with weddings. In Israel, unlike England and other Western countries, weddings had to be done through the rabbinate. An establishment, as every monopoly, doesn't treat its customers in a proper way. There is no situation just like in your community that every synagogue, every congregation has its rabbi, and the rabbi knows that he has to speak nicely to his congregants because otherwise he will not have the job anymore. That's not the case in Israel because no community, the secular people do not belong to any community. The rabbi is appointed by the government. He doesn't feel committed to his congregants. He treats them from, as you quoted Rabbi Sachs a few minutes ago, he treats them he looks at them from upside down. I would like to quote another quotation from Rabbi Sachs, which I really love, and that's when he said, and he says it several times, that we used to be the chosen people, but today we are the choosing people, because we have, just when there were airlines, the crew used to announce, we know that you could choose another airline. We really appreciate the fact that you have decided to choose British Airways or El Al. Well, the rabbinate or the establishment didn't understand that the Israelis want to have the choice and want to choose between options. And once you treat customers as captive audience, they respond in the same way. And they respond accordingly. And that's exactly what happened. So we started with weddings, to make weddings in a nice way, to expose the couples to bride counseling in a way that will inspire them and will not threaten them. But afterwards, we realized that the main problem is that 20% of the Israeli society cannot get married in Israel, not because they are not Jewish, but because they don't know how to prove that they are Jewish. And let me give you an example from England. And we have plenty of examples from England. If somebody comes from England, and let's say he comes from, his parents got married civilly, not halachically, and he comes to Israel, and he wants to make Aliyah, but his parents were not affiliated or belonged to the Reform or Conservative congregation, and their letters are not relevant to the chief rabbinate. And when this guy wants to get married in Israel, he has a problem. He has to prove his Jewishness. Now in London, it's relatively easy because, well, we'll go to the Beis Din and eventually we'll find out if his parents are Jewish or not. By the way, I personally performed a wedding 5 years ago of a Knesset member in Israel that got married to a British girl, a Jewish British girl, and she had to go through a very long process of proving her Jewishness because her parents were British, but they did not get married halachically. But that's the easy case. The bad scenario is about the Russians because they come from a place where there was no Jewish life under the communist regime that was there for more than 70 years. There was no religious life there. There was no Beis Din that could approve if somebody is Jewish or not. And there, they had no way to prove their Jewishness. We in Tzohar, we actually established a department that it's called Shorashim, Roots, that helps them to prove their Jewishness. So that's how we started. But today it's already an empire. We deal with ethical issues, with organ donations, with kashrut system. We deal with so many issues. Actually, you know, we are now dealing with preparing ourselves to the high holidays because we know that we have every year more than 70,000 secular people that come to us. And we know that this year there will be most probably no shuls. We have to prepare ourselves to minyanim in the backyards, in the gardens. It's a big job. And Baruch Hashem, we became actually the alternative address for whoever wants Jewishness or want to experience Judaism in a way that will not coerce him, in a way that will inspire him.
So if you had to define an aim, is it to provide accessible services to the less religious sector, or is it to encourage, through a different approach, greater religious buy-in? Is there an underpinning of Kiruv in what you're trying to do, Kiruv Ruchokim?
No, we are not a Kiruv organization. We are not a Kiruv organization. We believe that deep in their hearts, every Jew wants to be engaged to Judaism. We don't want to tell him how to engage himself and how to commit himself. We want him to be exposed to Judaism that is hidden from him. And he will choose, he will decide so there will be people that has decided in consequence to their exposure to us, they decided to put on film, but there were many Jews that did not do that. And we are not judgmental. Everybody, we want people to be proud with the Jewishness. We want them to respect the Jewishness, but more than any other things, we want them to be connected to Judaism in a way that they would be ready and to sacrifice something for their Judaism. We believe that if people will not be proud about their Judaism, they will not stay in Israel. Therefore, we want them to be engaged and to be committed in a certain degree to Judaism.
So this is about Judaism, but it's also very much about a nationalistic expression of Judaism, staying within the state.
Right.
So, one of the things you do in making yourself accessible is to make yourself affordable and to take on some of the bureaucratic work that the Rabbanut normally throws back at the people, but then still charges for. How are you able to keep your prices down and to be viable as an alternative establishment?
First of all, I want to admit that there are services, for instance, for weddings, we charge the couples a fee. So for them, they come to Tzohar not because we are cheaper than the rabbinate. We are more expensive than the rabbinate. They pay for to register for marriage, they pay us $50. It's not a lot of money, but in the rabbinate, you don't have to pay that. So once somebody decides to come to us, it's because he gets a better service and he gets better rabbis. And for you, I don't have to explain that. But in Israel, rabbi doesn't meet the couple before the wedding. If he's not a Tzohar rabbi, we are the only rabbis that meet the couple before the wedding. So basically, we are based on donations. I mean, we get 60% from our supporters in Israel, from our budget in Israel, and 40% we get from overseas.
Right. How have your initiatives been received by the establishment?
So it depends. I have to divide it to 3 categories. One, the rabbinate relies on us. For instance, on all the issues of proving Judaism of immigrants, not only that they accept our approvals, but they are the biggest source that send people to us. I can get a phone call from the chief rabbi 2 days after he attacked me publicly about saying something. I could get a phone call 2 days later, please, Rav Stav, could you help this guy and this guy to prove his Jewishness? And we will do that. I mean, we know the game. There's one level is politics and one level is assisting each other. So so on Shorashim project, that's a non-controversial project, and not only non-controversial, but the rabbis, the chief rabbinate itself actually sends to us people. There are projects like Yom Kippur, Purim, and other projects that are parallel to the rabbinate. I mean, the rabbinate doesn't deal with that, and they don't care about that. There are 2 projects that the rabbinate is a bit angry at us. One is the marriages, because actually, if we perform every year between 4,000 to 5,000 weddings a year, which is more than 25% of the secular weddings in Israel, they are insulted. I mean, why do they go to you and they don't come to us? And the second project is the kashrut, because we said that monopoly is bad for quality of service and is bad for the quality of the kashrut. And we need to create competition. I don't have to explain this to people that live in Western countries that understand that actually the basis of their economy is competition. Here in Israel, it's not that easy to explain that, especially when we talk about religious services. But I believe that more people understand that. Today, there is more understanding, even among the rabbinate, that Tzohar actually in the weddings and in the kashrut actually helps the rabbinate. Because of us, they had to improve the quality of services in the religious councils, and everybody admits that the level of the service has been increasing dramatically, and everybody says that it's because of the competition. I believe that the same thing will happen with the kashrut.
One of the things that's happened from the essentialishment of Tzahar and its publicity is that you become a home address for strange questions, people feeling they can get psak halacha with a little bit of seichel and an understanding and a breadth of knowledge. I mean, what are some of the unusual questions that you've had to turn your mind to?
Well, I can give you a lot of questions, but I will give you one example. It's an example of, let's take an example from the corona. Zohar actually led the decision in Israel that people should not go to shuls in the first wave of the corona. And we said that to follow the rules of gathering of 10 people in shuls is an impossible mission, because you cannot expect that the gabbai or the rabbi will start fighting with the 11th or 12th guy that arrives to shul. It's impossible. And we said, well, once the government has put the restriction of 10 people, let's shut down the shuls. It took the rabbis, the chief rabbinate, 3 weeks to understand that. Now let me give you another example. Weddings during Sfirat HaOmer, or during the 3 weeks. We don't know what will happen. But I came to the chief rabbinate and said, look, there are differences of customs between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. But when you go, the Sephardim do get married in the 3 weeks, the Ashkenazim do not. So I said to them, look, if a couple, they're secular for 3 generations, to say that he's Ashkenazi just because his great-grandpa, his name is Edelstein or Goldman, doesn't make sense. He doesn't know that he is Ashkenazi. He doesn't know that he's Sephardi. He's nothing. I mean, he has no background. He has no custom because he never goes to shul. So why don't you follow the minhag of the Shulchan Aruch to allow him to get married? I give you just 2 examples. I could give you hundreds of examples.
Right. And, the religious community has been particularly hard hit by COVID, by the coronavirus. I won't ask if that's some kind of judgment on us, but do you think there are lessons to be learned about the orthodox, the religious approaches to life and approaches to health that have come out of the last several months of experience?
Look, again, it's Shiva Asar B'Tammuz tonight, and I try to guard myself not to say, to filter between what I think and what I say. But first of all, there is no replacement to common sense. And I tell everybody, if your rabbi says something that doesn't make sense, then it's against the Torah, because the Torah must make sense. If it doesn't make sense, so then the rabbi is wrong. When I saw the film, when one of the biggest Gdolim said, well, it's not a disease. It's not a dever, because there are not 3 people out of 500 that died within 3 days, which is the halachic definition for dever. I say to myself, what a broch, what a chilul Hashem, what we are going to face here in the future. And I said to myself, and I said to my congregants, please, when you think that I say something that doesn't make sense, don't hesitate to make a phone call, to send me an email, and to correct me. And that's the first lesson. I think that what the way religious people behaved in the first wave, and by the way, even now, is the biggest chilul Hashem that occurred in the last 20, 25 years in Israel. I cannot remember such a situation where hundreds of boys, of yeshiva boys, are sent to hospitals, and worse than hospitals, to hotels, on the expenses of the government, and they feel that they do a favor to the government because they were the ones that did not follow the rules. They were the ones that are now cause a damage to the Israeli economy. The proportions of the religious people in the sick people and in the dead people in the Israeli community are 5 times the percentage in the population. And when I speak today with a secular guy and he says to me, you can't imagine how I hate what you represent, your colleagues, because I have to pay your crimes. It's not that I show solidarity because, well, that was the case. Coincidentally, you are the sick and not me. You are responsible for this crime because you did not follow the orders. The Rosh Hashiva that didn't allow his students to take the tests and to make sure that they are not sick, just because he says, well, it's nonsense, we don't have to follow these rules, is somebody that has to be sent to jail, not less than that. So, well, I'm sorry that's after filtering. I have much more to say, but I think it's enough.
So yeah, I'm just going to tease that point a little more. There was a piece written by Yuval Cherlo, who is one of your strong ethical poskim within Tzohar, where the question was asked about reporting neighbors and people who don't adhere to the government lockdown requirements and whether or not one should phone the authorities. And the quotation that I've got from him is, someone who stays silent is being ethically negligent because there are ethical and halachic imperatives not to stay silent when others are in distress. So I just had my pre-3 weeks haircut today, which is also my immediate post-Sphira haircut. Probably the first time since Purim. And my hairdresser said that he was absolutely devastated. He's trying to do the right thing. Everybody's putting on gloves when they come on, not touching anything. He gives them a fresh surgical mask. He's an advisor. He says lots of the hairdressers around the neighborhood are not keeping appropriate distances and are not wiping the place down. And he's got a strict appointment system, and he's worried that if the hairdressers start spreading the coronavirus in another wave, it'll be every hairdresser that's closed down and he's going to lose his parnasa. But he's terrified to report other hairdressers because it's going to reflect badly on the hairdressers. I said, I had read from Rav Stav's organization that he should report them.
I could tell you personally.
Pardon?
I could tell you from my experience, I sent policemen to a synagogue that did not obey to the rules, and I sent the police. The rabbi of Shoham, sent the police of Shoham to give reports to congregants in one of the shuls that did not obey to the rules, and I knew that they are not obeying to the rules. I personally sent the police there. And I will do that in the future if it will be needed. Because I think we are dealing with something that could kill thousands of people in Israel, and who will be able to say afterwards that he is not responsible if he did not do what is expected from us to do.
Just on some of the ethical questions that have come up in COVID, how does one choose who ought to be treated, and in what order? Within halacha, if you read the Rambam, there are certain things where you would give precedence to a Torah sage, for example, in the way things happen, or people have a certain chazakah and there are certain precedents. If people appear needing a ventilator, who do you choose who should be the first person to go on a ventilator?
Well, first of all, you deal with some of the most practical, unfortunately, question, but one of the most sensitive. Because I don't think there is a bigger gap between what is on the surface seems to be our sages' perception and the way we implement this today. If we had to implement simplistically what Chazal are saying, I could tell you that we would be in a very, very big trouble. Just imagine, I will say in Israel, or the rabbinate, let's say the chief rabbinate will say, well, if you have one breathing machine, the prioritization should be to a rabbi before a regular person. That's already, I don't have to continue the Mishnah. That's already the end of the story. I mean, we're finished. So we are lucky that there were a few rabbis 20, 30 years ago. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was one of them, that taught us that with all the respect to our sages and without having any tool to understand what's the difference, but today we don't do that. Today we use common sense with relying on halachic issues, sources, but we don't prioritize as the rabbis were prioritizing 2,000 years ago. What counts for us the most is the chances of the person, of the man or woman, to recover. If we see that we have one machine and two people need it, but one has a better chance, let's say 90% he will be recovered, and the other one has 5% to be recovered or 10% to be recovered, we will use it to the one that has the chances to be recovered. That's the main rule, but to go into all the details requires a long session. I hope that we will not need to deal with this soon, and it will remain only a potential class for Shavuos night, for something to deal with theoretically, as I was doing this year in my community. But I really hope that we will not need to come to it, because it will be very, very bad.
So one of the practical questions that's very much at the forefront of certainly the British press at the moment is, everybody accepts the idea that there is a value in saving lives. And, we've got copious sources that say to save a life is to save the world. Pikuach nefesh is one of the highest values in every respect. But the trade-off for being risk averse has been that within families and communities there has been pressure placed that has led to domestic abuse, and it's been difficult for people to be together. There's been a lack of outlets. There's also been a huge issue with the health of the economy. And the consequence of the health of the economy is people being able to support themselves afterwards and everything like that. How much do we put the risk to health and life in a COVID sense against the risk to livelihood and welfare? How do we balance those issues when you have a lockdown situation?
Well, first of all, it's an amazing question, because it requires, it depends on so many assumptions that I guess that if you take two Jews, you have three positions. In this case, if you take two professors for economy or for public health, you will get also three opinions. Basically, we understand that economy is not less important than saving lives, because eventually, if the country doesn't have resources to provide people jobs and people could not bring food home, they will not be able to survive. And forget the mental and social influences of losing jobs, etc., etc. The Gemara says that if somebody wants to work as a hunter is something which is requiring a kind of a risk. The bear or the lion or the whatever or the tiger could kill you. So the Nodeb Yehuda writes a very, very interesting tshuva that for parnasah, for earning money, although that's not the nicest job for Jews, he says it's required to be a hunter. It requires a kind of brutality and cruelness, etc., etc. But halachically speaking, he says it's legitimate to work as a hunter or even to volunteer to an army, even if you know that you will have to sacrifice your life, not for the Jewish state, for the British government or for other governments, just in order to get parnasa. Which means that to a certain degree, the halacha recognizes the need of having parnasa even on the expense of taking risks. Now, what is the risk? What's the percentage? Wow, it's too hard, it's too difficult to decide, and not for me here to say 5%, 10%, I think it's not proper.
Do you think there's going to be a change in people's attitude to shuls and smachot as a result of what's been happening?
Wow. If you wouldn't ask this, I would ask myself. I want you to know, and I want to connect it to the 3 weeks that we start tonight. And what I'm saying now will sound at the beginning as a joke, but trust me that I'm saying this from the depth of my heart. We were here from the shuls in Israel for 2 months. And when we came back to the shuls, I saw that many people did not show up. And not because they were sick and not because they were under risk, but because they discovered the convenience of davening home. First of all, it makes the davening much shorter. Instead of coming for 2 or 3 hours, you make it chaplap in 1 hour. Within 1 hour, you're done. Number 2, you daven with your family. Number 3, it's very close to the home. And I said in the first Shabbos that I came back, and when I realized that instead of seeing, let's say, 70% of the congregation, I saw hardly 20% or 30% of the congregation, I said publicly the following. I said, when the temple was destroyed, I'm sure that in the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, everybody was crying. Wow, how we deeply miss the temple. How could we do that? How will we be, the Gemara says, how will we be able to eat meat and to drink wine when we have no sacrifices? Aviva. But nevertheless, a few months later, a few years later, everybody eats meat, everybody drinks wine, everybody goes to shul. And today, if you ask me, not others, what do you prefer? To go to the Beis HaMikdash or to daven close to your shul? I'm not sure about the answer. Because the shul is much more convenient. Personally, I don't like to see a lot of bloodshed on the floor. I'm not sure that's my dream, to see all the bloodshed of the sacrifices. So people get used to it. And they saw all the positive aspects of davening in shul instead of davening in Beit HaMikdash. So I'm saying this as a kind of a warn to us. If we, the rabbis, we will not make sure when we come back to the shul after the corona is over, but completely over, if we will not make sure that davening in synagogue will be attractive, will be inspiring, people will stay at their homes. Because to daven at home sometimes is much easier.
Right. I've been told from my online experience I'm going to have to keep my sermons shorter as a consequence. That's one of the things.
See that?
Certainly with a mask on, that's going to happen.
No doubt.
I'm saying that not just for you, but there are lots of people who are watching who are wondering about coming back. I'm going to be keeping my sermons shorter. Please do come back.
No doubt.
As long as it's safe to do so. So one of the things that I want to know is using media and social media has been one of the things that has happened a lot for both chinuch, but also as an avenue for services over the last period. People have been tuning in online, and there's been a lot of discussion as, whether or not that counts as being a part of a minyan, or the ability to hear things. Should you respond, amen? Do you think that the corona experience is actually going to change the way we incorporate technology into our worship and reconsider some of the prioritizations on Shabbat and Chagim?
It's very difficult to predict how will this process end, because it depends in a few things that are unknown at the moment. There is a difference if the corona will take place for 2 or 3 years, God forbid, or it will be over in a few months once we will find, please God, a vaccine to deal with this. So that's one answer. But to respond directly to your question, I really believe that the impact of the Zoom and other issues is already here. Whether it will change the worship in shul or not, it's one question. But the fact that we talk now via Zoom, and I don't have to come to London to be a scholar in residence, but I could talk to you and to your congregants in this tool, through this tool, is telling you already the change. A few weeks ago, and I mentioned here Adam Siegel, that is working with us in Zohar, was organizing a meeting with a very famous lawyer. His name, Darshevitz, from New York. And in this Zoom meeting, Alan Dershowitz, in this Zoom conversation, we had maybe 80 people from South Africa, from England, from Australia, from United States. I mean, the boundaries and the distances are almost not important. I mean, we can talk to everybody all the time. So this will lead a change. But I want to say one thing that I'm sure that will never change with all the technologies. Nothing will replace the personal relationship between people. And nothing will replace the hug and the embracing and the smile and the personal and intimate relationship between people. And therefore, after saying that, without going into the halachic aspect, whether it's allowed or not allowed to participate in such a minyan or not, but the fact that you don't see the people, you're not a part of them, that's what makes the difference. And I think that Judaism is a lot about the warmth of community. And I think that's, by the way, one of the issues that we in Israel are jealous at the congregations in England and in other places. When we see the warmth and the connection, that congregants are connected one to another, that's something that we want to follow from, we want to copy from you. And we don't want to, it's not enough for us to see people through Zoom. We want to feel them. We want to be a part of them.
So I'm going to suggest anybody who's got a particular question, please use the participants tab and raise your hands. One of the outcomes of the 2012 World Cup in South Africa was a report on the vuvuzelas, these trumpety things that they used, and the spreading of disease through the vuvuzela. And there's a fascinating report. They're incredibly dangerous. And at the moment, the guidelines that we're receiving suggest that we will not be able to blow shofar indoors. But, you know, the World Cup was outdoors, and it's quite possible that we might be told it's not responsible to blow the shofar outdoors. You know, what would happen if we were given an instruction, you can't blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah? You know, how do we deal with that? It's so important to us. Wow. We only get one day of it this year, but how do we deal with it?
Look, I can't imagine such a decision in Israel. Very simple, because the coalition will fall apart in the same minute the idea will just be brought up. So I can't imagine. But now let's talk about this question rationally. Well, it depends. If scientists will come and say, we know as a fact that the corona is spreading through air and this is dangerous, I'm sure that there are solutions. But if that will be the conclusion, what's the difference between any halacha that pikuach nefesh is above, not only pikuach nefesh, safek, even if we have only a doubt, but the doubt has to rely on something. If the scientists will say, well, this could lead to sicknesses, I will definitely recommend sick people or people that are under risk, elder people, people that have problems in heart, etc., not to come. Choler, if he's sick, is potter. Is not committed to come and to listen to the shofar under such circumstances. But it's hard for me to believe that such a thing will happen.
Right, I have a question from Jeremy Mindell.
Thank you, Rabbi. Rav Stav, so what do you think the Israeli rabbinate could learn, or Israeli Jewish establishment could learn from the UK? And what could the UK learn from the Israeli establishment?
You want an honest answer, or you want a politically correct answer?
No, I think an honest answer, I would have said.
Okay. I think that, first of all, what we have to learn, and we have a lot to learn from the United Synagogue. You see, when I was several times in England, what I really admire about the United Synagogue is the fact that I know that 50, 60, 70, I don't want to be mistaken, to be corrected, but between 50 to 80% in different communities are people that not necessarily are observant, but they still feel connected to the congregation and they feel committed to the Jewishness, even though they are not fully observant. That's a secret that we have to copy to Israel. And if you ask me, what is the challenge of Zohar? That we haven't yet found out what is the formula, how to do that. Now, I know that the circumstances are different and Jews in the Gola are a bit different than Jews in Israel for various reasons. But yet, what is the formula to connect, to engage Jews that are not observant to shuls is something which is for us a secret that we haven't, a formula that we haven't discovered yet. What I think that the United Synagogues or the Jewish community should learn from Israel, not to copy the mistakes of the Israeli rabbinate, not to copy them to England. And unfortunately, sometimes I feel that a few rabbis in England are jealous at the power of the chief rabbinate in Israel, and they want to copy that bad model to England. So you have to be careful.
It's politically carefully phrased there. When you...
I asked Jeremy if he wants me to be honest or politically correct.
We always appreciate the candor. Do you ever find that there are spiritual models or religious ideas that you see from other religions and faiths around that are good practice, you think that we could adopt?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I personally, but I'm not an expert in that. I personally am a part of groups that run a lot of interfaith dialogues with Christians and with Muslim imams and leaders. I know that all of them are in crisis. I spoke 2 or 3 years ago with a mission of priests from Australia that arrived to Israel, and I was asked to share with them some ideas. And I asked them about their experience. How do they deal with modernity, with modern issues, with modern challenges? And if I summarize what they've told me after that meeting or during that meeting, if I summarize, actually, we don't know how to deal with modernity. So when I say I have a lot of respect when I see the seriousness of Muslims, how the way they take seriously their religion. But to tell you that I'm inspired by the values, not always. I'm inspired by their being determinist to implement the values, but not. I don't see that there are values in Christianity and in Muslim practice that sound to me something. Well, I never heard about such a perception. No, I think all of the ideas are inside the Yiddishkeit in Judaism, but could be that I'm not an expert for that. Although I'm involved a lot, I didn't see that we as Jews, we should learn a lot from them. I always get the impression that they are very interested to learn from us because they feel to us just like an elder sister. That, but again, could be that I'm ignorant in that. I don't want to say something that I'm not 100% positive about.
I've got a question about decorum in places of worship. Just been sent to me on chat. What do you think should be the mood in a synagogue?
Now you touch one of the challenges, I guess, all over the world. In Israel, I feel that this is one of the biggest challenges. Today, to come to synagogue, and I will be not politically correct, is one of the most boring experiences for most of the people that come there. They are not interested in what is said there. They read all the Shabbos paper, and in Israel, unlike England, we have plenty of them. When you come to shul, you have shelves full with Shabbos letters that could tell you about politics under the cover of religious politics, but it's politics just like any other politics. And I see the Gabbai announces, well, then everybody is awake. But when you see the Torah learning and other parts of davening, and I have discussions with my kids, and my kids that all of them are frum, keep on telling me, we hate to come to shul because we are not inspired there. Nothing is interesting there. So if the question is, what would I expect from a shul? And to tell you that I know how to do that, the answer is no. I would like to see shul as a place that when people come and gather there, number one, they're happy to come there. And number two, there is something that is happening there. Is it singing? Is it discussion between people, what they feel and how they want to express their gratitude or the needs to God or whatever? I don't know how to implement what I'm saying, but I know that the situation today is unbearable. It's a disaster.
What have you been trying in Shoam?
I've been trying different things. I've been trying to try davening with singing, to begin davening with singing. I've been trying, I've been encouraging people to make Karlebach's minyanim. I've been trying to make a kind of learning before davening. I've been trying to shorten davening. I've been trying to make learning between after Shachrit, before already. If I was successful, I would be a millionaire for that startup. The fact that I'm not was probably is that I haven't had too much success.
People keep asking, can we shorten davening? And when you talk about shortening davening, what exactly can you do to shorten the service?
First of all the Mishaberachs. Number one, all the Mishaberachs. At one period in the shul, our instructions were that there is only one ole, no 7 aliyot. The Balkoire is the one that is making the brochas. One is reading, and this one is making 7 times Baruch et Hashem Amvorach, etc., etc. No Mishaberachs. This for itself shortened the daven for 20-25 minutes. And my son comes over to me after that. You see, Abba, how things could look better if you just make it a bit different? So that's just an example. Now, I want you to know something. I personally don't feel that the davening is long. And I love cantor. And when I come to overseas and I see and I hear a good cantor, I'm in paradise. It's not my personal experience that the davening is boring. I'm describing the youngsters' experience. So that's one example. I think that one of the changes that should be done is, instead of saying all Psukei de Zimra, is to learn 2 verses of Psukei de Zimra, just to learn, to understand what we are saying. And this, as Tov Me'at Bechavana, it's better to daven less with intention rather than a lot and just reading. Now, what's the problem? What is the concern? Why we as rabbis, all the rabbis know that. Why we don't do that? Because we are afraid that eventually it will end up me'at, a little, without kavanah. So the question is now, what is better? To daven a lot without kavanah, or to daven a bit, a little, without kavanah, without intention? Well, that's a challenge.
Okay, a question from Linda. She says, as COVID is a worldwide problem, as with many medical issues, how do the rabbis manage to unite regarding halachic decisions, e.g. for the formats of shul services, as with transplants, etc.? How do you get halachic opinion formed on such things?
So first of all, to say rabbis unite is contradiction by essence. I mean, by definition, rabbis could not be united, because wherever you have 2 people, you have 3 opinions. Practically speaking, I could tell you that, for instance, in Sohar, we have a council of rabbis, and in every public decision, we gather ourselves by Zoom, and we take the decisions together by voting. But I guess that most rabbis, or many rabbis that are not under umbrella of Zohar, I guess each one of them takes the decision for himself. I guess, there are more distinguished rabbis and more respected rabbis and less, and I guess people consult with each other. I think that's the way rabbis form their opinions. I get all the tshuvas of Rabbi Weiss, which is a very famous Haredi rabbi. I get the tshuvas of Rav Hershel Schechter from New York, which is a very famous, distinguished rabbi in America. So I get whatever they write, we get right away by mail or by WhatsApp, and we read, we analyze. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. Just like rabbis.
Right. Rav Weiss has been absolutely prolific over the last several weeks. It's been lovely reading his material. Question from Jonathan Taylor.
Good evening, Rav Stav. Nice to see you again. I know that Tzar has been engaged many years in trying to resolve the issue of the non-Jewish status of hundreds of thousands of Russian Jews. and this issue all the time is raising its head. What is your general approach, and how do you solve these, in some cases, generations of Jews who are halachically not Jewish, but still live in the state of Israel, serve in the army, and as far as they're concerned, want to be considered as part of Kahal Yisrael?
So first of all, you touch a very important problem in Israel. To be honest, I think that the solution will not happen soon because of two reasons. Number one, because most of the Russians don't want to convert. Because in Israel today, it's very easy to be non-Jewish and to be an Israeli. Because most of the secular people couldn't care less about the fact that the son gets married to a Jewish girl or to a non-Jewish girl. They don't care. So that's one answer. The second reason why it's not going to happen, because the demands that the chief rabbinate puts in front of the candidates to convert are unacceptable for 90% of them. And the 10% that do accept that, they pretend that they do accept that. After they finish converting, they behave just like they behaved before. So as long as the situation will be that, number one, the Russians don't want to convert, and number two, the chief rabbinate raises standards that the vast majority of the Russians is not ready to accept, and is ready to accept only they pretend to accept, there will be no solution to that. What do I suggest? It's not my suggestion. I'm following Rabbi Nachum Rabinovitz that passed away a few weeks ago, and I was a part of his team that suggested the following. The halacha recognizes conversion of minors under the age of 12 and 13, 12 for girls and 13 for boys, even though they are not completely accepting upon themselves Torah and mitzvot. In this way, we don't have to put the Russians in a contradiction between their practical life and being Jewish. And halachically, it's much better to convert in this way rather than asking them to lie in front of the Beis Din and a few days later to come back to behave like a non-observant people. What is the advantage of that? The advantage of that once you talk to the families and you explain them that you want to convert the kids, and I have experience with that because I personally am involved in this conversion, you see more and more families that want to convert the kids, and as a result of this process, they are ready not to cook on Shabbat, to eat kosher. You have to understand that in Israel, unlike London, to eat kosher in Israel, it's not such a big challenge. I mean, you have to be a very, very frum secular in order to find a non-kosher supermarket for meat. I mean, for most Russians, it should be a very big effort to find a place that will sell them non-kosher meat. So to keep separation between meat and milk, that's not a big issue. So for most of them, the converting of the minors should be the solution and could be a solution. Unfortunately, the chief rabbinate does not agree to that, not because they don't know that this is the right solution. They know that. As a matter of fact, they even wrote articles before they became chief rabbis that approved this decision. But because of political pressure, they don't want to encourage this process. And therefore, we are stuck with this problem.
A question from Tony.
Hello, it's from Anne. Hello, Rabbi Stav, very interesting, thank you. How can you involve women more in synagogal life in Israel?
First of all, by the way, in Soha, we have more than 450 women that are bright counselors, and we are very proud with them. They are big partners in the leadership of Tzohar. By the way, we have one of the board. We have few women in the board, but one of the women is an English woman, Madeleine Black, that made Aliyah. Maybe you know her, a few years ago. Now, I think that involvement of women in shul requires a few things. There is the halachic dimension, and there is the social dimension. In the halachic dimensions, I have no news. I guess what is permitted, and what's not permitted is not permitted. And I think that there are not too many news in there. But in all the social aspect of involvement in shul, I think there could be done much more. I will give two examples. For instance, the location of women. Where should be the woman located? How will they be able to feel that what is going on in shul is not behind the screen, but they are a part of it? One example. Second example, how could we involve them in giving shiurim if they want, if they are capable to do? For instance, now, when there are restrictions, I could share with you an anecdote from today. In one of our shuls, because of the restrictions of numbers, that now we are restricted to 20, so the gabbai wrote a letter without asking the rabbi in his shul, and without asking me. He wrote a letter as follows. And he says, well, since we have almost 80 people that come to shul, and we are allowed to put in one space only 20, so to the men part will come 20 men, and to the woman part will come 20 men, and to another whole room will come 20 men, and to another porch will come 20 men. Now you can imagine how the woman reacted to this letter. And they sent me, the rabbi, are you approving that? Are you accepting the fact that women that want to come and they do come every Shabbos to shul, and because of these restrictions, they will be excluded from shul? That's just an example of things that should be changed.
Right. So coming to the 3 weeks, you've painted a picture of some of the challenges facing Israeli society and some of the tensions within it, and even we've only addressed within the Jewish world, within Israel, or the people who affiliate with the Jewish world. Coming into the 3 weeks, have you got any message of hope for us? Something for us to feel that maybe beyond Tisha B'Av, there's something that we can look forward to?
Well, let's take things in proportion. I want you to know, I was once in Kinloss. I don't know if that was a part of my speech or not, but in the recent couple of months, I keep on repeating that. First of all, we have to realize we live in the most privileged generation of Jewish history, I dare to say, since David HaMelech. I don't want to say better than in the time of David HaMelech, but at least in the same level of David HaMelech. There was never a situation that the Jewish people, number one, were under independence, sovereignty, as we have today. Strong economy, strong government, strong nation. And we were never under a situation where Jews all over the world lived with equality and freedom of choice. And it never existed in Jewish history that we have these two phenomena, that we live with Jewish independent sovereignty, and Jews in the diaspora live with freedom and equality. So first of all, let's express our gratitude to Hashem for that. And we should not take this for granted. The truth is that when I fast tomorrow at Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the truth is that I'm not full with confidence that I should fast. because I'm so happy with what we have today in Israel. For me, it's much better than the time of the Second Temple, no doubt. You know, to come to Tisha B'Av, for me, to say the prayer of Nachem, and if you will read carefully the words, you will find that you say words that are false, that are lie. You will say that Yerushalayim is without her son. Yerushalayim is desolated, is a desert, without her sons. Jerusalem was never so populated as it's populated today. Never in Jewish history. So, number one, we have to be full of gratitude and full of pride that we are privileged to live in this era. But privilege does not come without commitment. Because as we've learned from Jewish history, we are the biggest enemies of ourselves. We never collapsed because of our external threats. It was always us that destroyed ourselves. This was the case in the First Temple, when the division of Judea kingdom and Israeli kingdom have split it up, and this was the beginning of the collapse of the Jewish empire, and the same thing occurred in the Second Temple. So our commitment and our obligation is to see how each one of us could contribute a bit to bridge gaps, to try to unite ourselves and to understand that if we're given that present, that gift from Hashem, it's not because we deserve it. It's most probably because of our parents, because of the sacrifice of our parents, maybe in the Holocaust, maybe in the Inquisition, maybe in the pogroms, because of others. It's not that we don't feel that we are such righteous people, that we deserved all this good that Hashem has given to us. But if we got this gift, we have to do a bit in order to pay back. And each one of us, and I think that's what I devote my life for. That's my life mission, to try to connect and to engage more and more Jewish people to the Jewish values, to the Jewish vision, to the Jewish world, and to unite them and to connect them more to Israel, more to the Jewish future. It's not enough for us to be connected to the Jewish past. We need to be connected to the Jewish future and to engage ourselves to the Jewish future. That's my message.
So, Rav Stav, it looks like you have the energy to keep on going, but and I know you said you weren't sure if you were going to be fasting, but you've only got a little bit of time left to have a drink of water and to be able to get yourself ready for the fast. It's 11:30 in Israel. I'd like to thank you so much for your frank insight, your inspirational words, your thoughts, your vision, the work that you have committed yourself to doing within Israeli society for the whole Jewish world. It's been wonderful to be able to share this evening with you. Thank you so much. I'd also like to thank Adam Siegel, who has been sitting in on the call. I got to know Adam while we were in Sydney. I worked with his father on a couple of projects. Adam was an outstanding educator, a top-level educator in Melbourne, and is now the International Resource Development Manager for Tzohar. And he comes over here occasionally. It's been lovely to touch base with him. I
would like just to say one more word. Rabbi, I would like to add one more word. I want you to know your congregants and yourself. We in Israel, and I see this something that is very new. We think a lot of our brothers and sisters overseas. It was never in Israel expressed in such a way that it's expressed in the last couple of months. And trust me, I'm an Israeli for more than 60 years. And I've never experienced such solidarity to hear what's going on in London and what's going on in New York and what's going on in other communities worldwide. And I think that we really share the same faith, the same vision, the same faith. And I really want to wish all of you a lot of success, a lot of health under the leadership of the Rabbi. And I want to wish all of us that maybe until tomorrow morning, the fast day will become a source of pride and joy and happiness, as the Prophet has promised us.
Amen. Now, I just wanted to wish Adam a b'sha'a tova, as he's about to become a grandpa for the first time of a baby here in, please God, in London. So we look forward to you being able to join back with us. And Rav Stav, we look forward to you joining us in London. Everybody on this call, please do join me next Wednesday evening when at 8:15 I'm interviewing the author Stephen Uzel, who has written the book I Am Yuden, a novel based on a factual account of a Jew who worked undercover as a Nazi within the SS, within the Krakow camp and ghetto. So please join me next Wednesday evening. Before that, please keep well, fast well, look after yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you either online or even better in person soon over the next several days. I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Rav Lawrence. Really very interesting.
Thanks, Simon.
See you tomorrow morning.